Everyone is lying about Bronny James. Originally, when Bronny was coming onto the scene, a lot of people were acting as if this guy was the next LeBron James or the next generational talent to make the NBA. And although Bronny has made some nice improvements over the years, I think people need to pump their brakes at least slightly on his expectations. Because not only are there a couple flaws that I do see within his game, but also just for any young guy, especially a guy who wasn't drafted yet, it's just unfair to put those level of expectations on him no matter who his dad is. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicySports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. At this point, we all know that LeBron James is one of the best players of all time. And a perfect example to show how great LeBron truly was and still is at this point is originally when LeBron was getting drafted coming out of high school, he had ridiculously high expectations on his shoulders. People saw this guy as a generational type talent and certainly one of the best players in the NBA. And having those level of expectations on anybody at a high school age is just ridiculous. People saw LeBron as a guy who could not only score for himself at a very high level, but also could facilitate for others, making him a very winning player as well. And overall, people just saw LeBron as the absolute perfect prospect coming into the NBA. But the fact that LeBron not only lived up to expectations, but even exceeded expectations, really just shows how truly great he was throughout his career, and still is at this point. And although that was phenomenal for LeBron personally, I do think in this case for his son Bronny James, it could bring up some issues, and already has. I think a lot of times when you talk about all-time great players like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, and others, if those players have kids and if those kids get anywhere near NBA level, a lot of people have ridiculously high expectations on their kids, similar expectations that they do for the actual players, and in my opinion, it just puts their kids in bad situations. And I do think we're seeing some of this with Bronny James. Now, Bronny really came onto the scene a couple years ago when we started to see some highlight films from him. He was looking incredibly impressive with great athleticism, a nice understanding of the NBA game, a nice ability to score for himself, create for others, and overall he did look like a pretty good player. And over the last couple years, I certainly would say we have seen an improvement from Bronny as he is getting the best trainers, he's training with his dad LeBron James, and overall he's just putting a ton of hard work into his game, of course. And honestly, I do think Bronny shows a lot of similar aspects to what his dad LeBron James does, but obviously on a much lesser level. Now overall, I definitely think there are a bunch of different positive aspects to Bronny's game, but with that being said, I think people need to pump their brakes at least slightly on their expectations for him. And I have a couple different reasons to back that up. Now the first factor that I want to touch upon is his averages. Now on the season, Bronny's averaging 14 points per game on 5.5 rebounds per game on 2.8 assists. And obviously those numbers are decent, but at the same time, they don't necessarily jump out at you. And typically when you talk about highly touted prospects in high school, they typically put up some pretty good numbers, at least 18 points plus. And with Bronny, we're really not seeing that. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is I actually mentioned this in a lot of my videos, is sometimes certain players play much better than their numbers would suggest. There's certain guys that might average 15 points per game, for example, but play much more like a guy that averages 20 points per game due to their efficiency and some other things they do out there in the court. So that certainly is a factor, but in my opinion, when I watch Bronny, I do think he's a little bit better than those numbers would suggest, but I don't necessarily think he's much better. And just to give you some context on those numbers, a guy in Brian Scalabrine, who we all know at this point didn't necessarily pan out in the NBA, but early on before he got drafted, he was averaging 16 points per game on 10 rebounds per game on 3 assists. So basically across the board, he had better numbers than Bronny. Now I do want to be clear that numbers aren't everything, but it's just something to give some perspective on what Bronny's showing so far. Now the next point that I want to touch upon is recently Bronny James was elevated to a 5-star recruit. And when you look at the history of 5-star recruits over the years, a lot have been successful in the NBA. Of course some haven't been, but a lot have. So obviously it's a very prestigious thing to get, to become a 5-star recruit in high school. But when you look at Bronny specifically and you compare his statistics to a bunch of other guys that were 5-star recruits in the past, it is pretty clear that Bronny's numbers, at least solely his numbers, are much lower. Now obviously there have been a few guys that didn't pan out in the NBA even if they were 5-star recruits, but one thing that all these guys had in common in the past is all these guys dominated at the high school level. And when you look at Bronny, although he is doing a lot of things very well out there, and I do give him a lot of credit, I don't necessarily think he's dominating out there. So in my opinion, I do think this 5-star recruit given to Bronny James is a little bit premature, and I do think just due to his name is certainly a big reason for why he got it. Now obviously, as I mentioned, I do want to be clear, Bronny is a very good player and he's doing a lot of great things out there, but I just don't think he's a true 5-star recruit at this point. But now, what does all this mean? Where do I think Bronny's gonna go in the future? Now, while I do agree with everything that I did say in this video, at the end of the day, I do think Bronny does have pretty decent potential. Obviously, he's not even in the NBA yet, so he has a ton of time to improve his game over the years, and I do think he will do so. But with that being said, I do think once he makes it to the NBA, he's gonna have ridiculously high expectations. He already does at this point, but it's not truly hitting him until he makes it to the NBA, assuming he does make it there. Because once he makes it to the NBA, and once he gets drafted by a team, at that point, people will start to put concrete expectations on his shoulders of potentially becoming an all-star type player, maybe even a good starting level player or whatever it ends up being, but I do think it's probably going to be pretty high expectations. And for a guy who's going to be very young, even at that point, it's going to be very hard to live up to expectations, no matter what they'll be, because obviously they're going to be very high. And something that could happen, which is something that we see all the time, is a player comes into the NBA, they have very high expectations, and maybe early on they don't play all that well and aren't truly living up to expectations, and then they start to lose confidence and their career slowly spirals out of control. Now, I'm not necessarily saying Bronny's career is going to go in that direction, but there's always that concern whenever you put a really high level of expectations on a very young player. So in my opinion, what Bronny needs to do going forward is just to continue to work on his game day after day and just continue to fine-tune certain things, make sure he doesn't have all that many weaknesses, while also working on the strengths that he does have and just improving upon those abilities. And at that point, once he makes it to the NBA, he may be able to become a pretty polished player, and who knows what the future could be from there. Whenever you talk about a younger player that has the ability and does have confidence as well, which Bronny probably does have at this point, a player like that is extremely dangerous because who knows how good that guy can get. Whenever you talk about a player in general with confidence, that player is always dangerous, but when you talk about a young player that has all the potential in the world and that guy has confidence as well, it's obviously extremely dangerous for the rest of the league. So I definitely am very interested to see where Bronny does end up going from here going forward. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with Bronny James. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Bronny James is a little bit overrated, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.